Testing. 1, 2, 3. This is Joe Park. I am interviewing today for the Oklahoma Christian College Living Legend Library, Mr. James Craddock of the Weatherford News. This interview is being conducted on January the 24th, 1970, during the Midwinter Conference of the Oklahoma Press Association. We do have Mr. Craddock here. We'd like to begin, if you don't mind, if you would give us some biographical information about yourself, Mr. Craddock, as to where you were born, when you came to Oklahoma, when you got involved in the newspaper business, and the conditions that existed, I suppose, in the newspaper business at that time, as far as the newspaper's role in the community, its place in the community, any anecdotes at that time. So we'll just begin, if you don't mind, with some biographical information about both you and your newspaper.
I've lived in Oklahoma all my life. Was born May 29, 1904 at Medill. At that time it was Indian Territory. And I grew up there as a kid. Incidentally, my birthplace is known as Oil Mill Hill and still is, and that's not the most progressive part of Medill, but my dad helped build the oil mill there and was with it for 12 or 13 years while I was a kid growing up.
What was an oil mill?
Well, that's where you take seed from cotton and process it into cottonseed oil, cake, hulls, primarily for cattle feed. I went to started school there in the first grade, and except for 1 year when I took out and went to Altus in the 7th grade. My older sister lived at Altus. Incidentally, my mother died when I was 7 years old, and my dad and I were living alone in Medill, and she thought I should come out there. Well, of course, Medill country, you have trees and creeks and everything, and that's all I'd ever known. And when I went to Altus in 1917, there wasn't a tree in town as big as your big toe, and I don't think there was a lawn. So to me, I thought, and when they spoke of God's country, they meant Medill and Marshall County. The day school was out, incidentally, I got on the train and went back to Medill. And I stayed there until the middle of my first year in high school. My sister had moved to Chickasha in the meantime, and she insisted I come up there and go to school. And incidentally, the superintendent of schools at Chickasha at that time, T.T. Montgomery, was the superintendent of schools at Medill when I started in first grade. And I continued high school at Chickasha until the middle of my senior year. Well, it was necessary for me to drop out of high school. In the meantime, my sister had moved back to Altus the year before, and I stayed with the very fine family that just more or less took me to raise, E. Hollingsworth. They had a son my age. We played high school football together, and they just more or less took me as one of their own. But I dropped out of school, as I say, in the middle of my senior year, and went back out to Altus and went to work for Chickasha Cotton Oil Company in their oil mill, in their office. I fully intended to go back to Chickasha the next year to finish my high school. But one thing and another, I was prevailed upon to stay at Altus.
About when was it?
I went to Altus in January of 1922, and for that fall I went back to high school. I only lacked a credit and a half in through, and after Thanksgiving, I only went to school half a day up until the end of the semester. I worked at the filling station. The fact of the matter is, all from the time I was in high school, clear on up until practice through college, I worked at filling stations on Saturdays and Sundays, holidays, and during the summer.
So you did finish that credit in half and then enrolled at Scotland College?
I graduated from Aldous High School with that, and then of course that was the midterm. All my schooling seemed like something happened at midterm. Anyway, that's when I finished, and of course the following fall I went to Southwestern State College at Weatherford. I'd never seen the school, I'd never seen the town, I'd never had any intention of going. But the football coach who had been at Aldous, I never did play for him. He was there the year before when I was at Chickasha. When I was at Aldous, he was at Duncan. We did play against him. But two of my buddies at Aldous were going up to Weatherford because of Dutch boils, and they prevailed upon me to go with them. At that time, I didn't know what I planned to do. I wanted to go to school, and I thought, well, a year or two won't make any difference. So I did. But when both of them had been to Weatherford to tournaments and this, that, and the other, but I never had. We went up on a train, and they had me getting off every station for 50 miles before we got there. And so actually, it was more or less by accident that I landed at Weatherford to begin with. But when I went back there, though, it was by design.
You graduated? Did you graduate there then from Weatherford?
Well, that's the sort of point. I liked an hour and a half. Again, I dropped out of school in the middle of my junior year to run out of money. I hadn't intended to go back that fall anyway. I intended to work the first semester and go to the University of Illinois with Dutch Boyles, who's going up there and being coach. So with this semester that I had lost, I went to summer school my last year, but I still liked this credit and a half. At that time, we had an August short course, which I intended to as well. Out of the clear sky, I had an offer of a newspaper job at Guthrie. And by then, I decided that's what I wanted to do.
Had you been taking courses in college aimed towards a newspaper career?
I had an English major, and we didn't have any department of journalism as such up there. We did have a school paper, which I worked on, was business manager, and I edited the annual and this, that, and the other. But when this offer came, Guthrie, I immediately decided, well, this hour and a half is not going to make too much difference, and I'll finish up my correspondence and get the degree. So I went to Guthrie the 1st of July in 1927. At that time, I'd never seen Raymond Field, but he was my boss.
Now, was that the Guthrie Daily Leader?
Yes.
Was it a daily paper?
Oh, yes. Very, very good small town daily. I think not because of me, but during my time there and for some time after, it was far better than most small town dailies. You had to have a pretty good wire story to get it on page one if you were editing the paper for Mr. Field. Gotcha.
So the emphasis was really on local news.
Oh, yes.
Now then, how long did you stay with the Guthrie Daily Leader?
Oh, roughly 2.5 years.
What kinds of stories? What was the biggest story? Were you on the editorial side?
Oh, yes, entirely.
At that time, what was the biggest story? Break.
Well, about that time, Logan County had the hottest oil play in the state. Now, that was shortly before this big field in Oklahoma City came in. I wasn't an oil expert by any means, but I ended up as oil editor. And I would say most days we had a lead story on the oil development in Logan County, Lovell and Crescent and Marshall, Roxana Field, and it was a deep field. So at that time, they were about the first place we were going down 6,000 feet to find oil. And
was this development at that time getting national attention too?
Yes, it was the hottest spot in Oklahoma. You remember, this was just the forerunner to this big Oklahoma City field. You didn't have any oil out here then. It came a couple of years later.
This is before the wild range.
Yeah. But it bothered
Was it after the Seminole field?
Oh, yeah.
And then after you left the Guthrie daily leader, where did you go then?
Well, I went to Weatherford, and there's a story back at that. Incidentally, I had become managing editor, the leader. Raymond was involved in American legal politics on a national basis. He's gone all life. And incidentally, when he worked at it, he's still the best newspaper man I've ever been around. Of course, he was my reporter for a while, and maybe one day he'd call up at noon and he'd be in Tulsa. But I had mentioned at times that, Weatherford is a good field. There ought to be more done with the paper that's been done. And Fairmount Creamery was a big operation in Guthrie at that time, and they had moved a manager in there. His name was Skeet Flynn. And I got acquainted. We were good friends, and they proceeded to build a big new plant. And one evening, Raymond Field, Skeet Flynn and I were in his office where they were building the plant, and I made some crack about Weatherford, and Raymond Field said, "Well, why don't you buy it?" And of course, I said, "With what?" And there we go. Began, I said, "You think it's such a good deal, why don't you buy it?" I said, "Well, what did it take for it?" I didn't know. Well, in the end, I did call Mr. Harry Dray, who I had known, had to take it, and actually put a price on it. So he did. Raymond asked me if I thought it was worth it. I said, "Well, how would I know what in the newspaper property is worth? I never had any experience in the business end of it. I don't know what the dynatype machine costs or what that equipment's worth or anything else. But I said, I just know that there's more there than is being obtained at the present time." Short of the story, he said, "Well, if it's a good deal, I'll arrange to get you the money." And he did. So I went to Weatherford as the owner, editor and publisher of the Weatherford News as of the 1st of October in 1929. You're probably too young to know about that, but anybody that borrowed money in 1929, he was in trouble before he even got started. So we had some real hard years. Of course, I wasn't alone. I had a lot of company.
You stayed there since that time?
Since that time, same location, exactly. Now I'm in my 41st year, I guess now. I'm not, that'd be right, but
what constituted a good newspaper? What were the ingredients of a good newspaper? What did you feel were the ingredients of a good newspaper in 1960?
Well, I had to feel the main things were what we were doing on the Guthrie Daily later, and that was primarily local news. Not necessarily startling, but covering. Of course, back then, pictures were a rarity for a weekly paper. So there wasn't too much of that. And then, of course, I felt like that any town needed a newspaper that would promote the things that it needed, and maybe give credit for things that were accomplished. And to that end, we've always tried to publish a strictly local newspaper, and there are arguments now that maybe we ought to try to get into the national news and this, that, and the other, but that's still rather difficult. You come out on Thursday, and something that happened Monday may have been changed half a dozen times.
So the emphasis, now it was a weekly paper then.
Yes, still is.
What have been the major changes in that 41 years as far as the editorial side or the social side of the newspaper?
Well, we, in our case, of course, the first year that I was there, we changed presses. We had from a 2-page press to a 4-page press, and added a casting box and power saw and things like that that I didn't have before, which today is old hat, but then it was a pretty big deal for us. And
now these were added, I take it then, after the stock crash of
1930.
These were added in 30?
Our business, we hit running. Our business was good in the 3 months of 29 and practically all through 30. But we used what money we had, put it in equipment. Well, then just like that, at the end of 1930, instead of, we equipped to do twice as much with the same population. Well, what happened just overnight, we didn't have half as much to do. And it didn't make any difference what your advertising rate was. People didn't want it. And they didn't care whether you had 100 or 10,000 circulation. They still didn't want it. And most of them, if they bought it, they couldn't pay you. It was, but it was the same with our customers. They were having the same problem. But we have, you've seen modernization. Well, you get better print, and we have started using more pictures than some of the weeklies did, earlier than some of them, and we still do. We have our own dark room and our own engraving equipment. Of course, remember, we're still a letterpress operation, and this offset thing has changed a lot of things in newspaper business.
I was wondering, in fact, what impact offset has made as far as you're concerned. You are still letterpress.
Yes. Well,
do you consider going? Have you considered? And are you still considering the possibility of going offset?
Frankly, no, not me. It's a time or an age factor. 10 years ago, yes. In fact, I contemplated. I knew we needed to make some kind of a change. Our volume had grown, and it had outgrown our press capacity. And I considered the offset business, which I didn't anticipate that it would come as fast as I don't think anybody did. Well, I ended up buying an 8-page web press. We print 8 pages where we used to print 4, and we have no particular problem with press work now. The main advantage, as I see it, to offset, and I don't pretend to know a great lot about its operation, but number one, you can get by with offset with a minimum or no printers, and certainly the product, if they do it right, is an improvement. In other words, you can't match picture reproduction of offset with letterpress if they do it right. Now we think we do a lot better reproduction in our case than a lot of offset papers do, but that's because of they don't take the time or trouble or never do it right, or maybe they don't have as good pictures or something.
Now, what impact do you think the offset has made on the industry, not just your paper, but on the industry as a whole? Has it opened up? Has it made the industry more competitive? Has it opened up the possibility, I guess I'm saying, for someone getting into the business on less money?
Definitely, it has, and it's becoming more apparent all the time. For instance, in our case, we have always tried to produce the kind of paper that people up and down the street, whether the advertisers or just readers, couldn't truthfully say, well, there's nothing in it. We go to more trouble than that. And of course, we have a sizable investment. First thing the offset did is gave you a license to steal. You just go figure that. Well, I have a very personal experience to show you how it's working. Last July the 1st, a throwaway newspaper came into existence in my town in competition with me. At that time, their total investment was a post office box. Post office. They sold the advertising locally, got a little bit of copy, not enough, loaded it up, took it down to Sentinel, had it printed, bring it back, and get free distribution. Without offset, you'd be awful hard to do that. And of course, now their investment, they've been operating 6 months. They finally identified themselves, established a little office.
Well, they're still in that.
Yeah. And that's happened all the time. And see, we have in this state the law requires publication within the county. And there were good reason for it beginning, and personally I think it's still a good sound law. But as more offset enterprises start up, there's more and more agitation for changing that law. There's another side to it too. Printers have become very, very scarce. And there's some of the smaller places where a man and his wife have done it all. He gets too old to do it, but he can't get anybody to come out there. If he can, he can't afford it. Well, he could still maybe paste up his paper and take it someplace else, and they print it and bring it back. And there's a growing demand for so-called central plants, and there is within the Press Association a growing element of people who think that the state law should be changed. It hasn't been so far, but no doubt it will.
Now, on the editorial side of it, has the role of the newspaper as far as what all the news has been print, or what has the role of the newspaper editorially changed in the last 40 years at the local level?
I think so. In this regard, many of our early day papers, and some years later, were politically motivated. They were they were established, particularly for them. And if you were a Democratic newspaper, a Democrat could do no wrong, and every Republican was a rascal or worse. And they said so regularly. There was always, even you'd have two papers in the same town, as there was in Weatherford before my time. And they were pot shooting each other all the time. And the main reason for their existence was politics. Well, now we still have papers that have political leanings one way or another, but there are not many that have been established in recent years just strictly for political reasons, because you might do all right in campaign here and then starve to death for another 4 years, or if you guessed wrong, you'd still be in trouble. And I think in all papers, the small weeklies and the small town dailies, they're all more inclined today and have in recent years to give your side a story, whether they agreed with you or not. I'm talking about the political angle. Why, I think in the old days, if you ran a Democratic newspaper, so-called, it'd be pretty hard for a Republican to get a favorable line in the paper, regardless of what it would be, and vice versa.
You think along this line, then, that probably the local newspaper has a broader interest in the community than one.
Yes, I think so. They all had to have an interest in it, to the extent that if it didn't go along, they weren't going to live. See? But if it didn't, they still had to promote their political theories, and they cover a broader field all the way around.
What would you say would be the most humorous incident you can recall as far as your newspaper?
Well, there have been many. We've had our problems with, I don't know whether this sounds that's exactly right or not on this, but years ago, we print our paper on Wednesday evening. And we had a restaurant up the street from us, and just at the dinner hour, a fellow shot his stepson. Well, that was pretty big, and for once a timely story for a weekly newspaper. Of course, we were practically ready to go to press. We heard of that thing done. And our lead story, of course, and, we had on our last run with the 4-page press. You know, you print 4 pages on one side and on another one. We were practically through with the last run when a lady we had noticed there. One of these lines where we had the man shot his son-in-law. That someway turned out to be an eye. Here he was on page 1. I didn't be embarrassing. It was out of the question to rerun the whole thing because we'd already thrown in the other 4 pages. And I don't know whether this has ever been done before or not. I don't know how we ever hit upon it. But we took a knife and we just pecked that eye. Well, you couldn't tell sure what it was, and of course you knew what it was supposed to be, and that's all there was to it. And you just got one paper. You didn't realize that they were all that way. We had another example it's humorous to some people, but at times to us was dead serious. A few years ago, we take our tracts up to the post office and leave them on the rack if we can't get in, which sometimes we are. This time, early the next morning, postmaster called me and said, something's happened to your tax. I said, no, what that they were working on it. I had a truck come along and carried them away. And got to try and run them down, and well, they'd already gone to the distribution centers all across the country. This was the last paper for election. We had a page ad for state senatorial candidate that we didn't like much anyway, and he knew we didn't like it, and our town didn't like it particularly. Since he was going to field something else. And there wasn't any way to get those papers back. They went to Chicago and everywhere else. And we ended up, fortunately at that time, we hadn't owned them on them, so we reprinted the complete issue. And got to mail it, it was just a day late.
Has the reader changed quite a bit? 40 years, and so how? For one, would you say the reader is much more knowledgeable and broader?
Oh yes, more people read than used to, except just real recent years. That may not be true because a lot of them watch television and listen to the radio and just skim something over, but they don't have to just take your review, put it in the paper. More people now don't just say, well, that's got to be so, because maybe they've heard another angle, or they have ideas of their own, and of course, used to, if you made a statement maybe wouldn't stand up entirely. It might be a month before anybody knew any different, but now they probably knew it 3 hours before you had it in print. Or
does that mean that your higher heads then have to be sharper?
They should be, and I think overall they are. They have most of them have had more formal education than they used to have, but some of our very best newspapers in this state were never college graduates, and I think we still find some of them yet.
I think that about picks us up.
Well, it's been interesting to me. I have to always say a good word for Weatherford and the Weatherford News, and for that matter, the state of Oklahoma too.
I do appreciate